No matter what anyone tells you, there's no monkey shortage. Not in U.S. scientific research labs. There's just a shortage of common sense and ethics when it comes to adopting modern non-animal techniques. But now U.S. scientists may be forced to go non-animal if a crackdown on illegal monkeys cuts off supply and ends their monkey addiction. That story is next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, you already know the company Indictments. It bred beagles for research and was forced to shut down in Virginia when it was in violation of animal welfare laws and put up 4,000 dogs for adoption to the public. Now Indictments is back in the news on another matter, announcing it's no longer importing monkeys from Cambodia. Maybe that's because Indictments appears to be one of the two key companies dealing with 8 Asian nationals recently indicted for alleged monkey smuggling last November. That's when Mosfrey Krai was arrested at JFK in New York. He's the Cambodia Deputy Director of the Department of Wildlife and Biodiversity for the Cambodian Forestry Administration, Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries. Krai's arrest unsealed a federal indictment that included Krai's Cambodian boss, plus 2 principals of Vani Bioresearch in Cambodia, and 4 other co-conspirators, also Asian nationals. If convicted, the 8 could face 5 to 20 years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. In the meantime, U.S. Fish and Wildlife continues to look at tens of thousands of monkeys in labs across the U.S. to see how many monkeys are part of the scheme and subject to seizure. That could force scientists to wean off their addiction to monkeys, specifically the long-tailed macaque, which the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, put on the endangered species list in July of this year. It was inevitable after years of a declining monkey population, mostly because of aggressive schemes where wild-caught monkeys are misidentified as bred for labs so they could be sold to research companies in the U.S. The misidentification, dubbed monkey laundering, is a form of animal trafficking that's a violation of the Animal Welfare Act and the Lacey Act. That's the reason some labs are rightfully getting nervous. Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel is a top primate scientist who once worked at the Washington Primate Research Center. Now she's a PETA scientist and a noted monkey expert. She talked to me about how the federal indictments of the 8 Asian nationals could end researchers' monkey dependence for the good. My conversation with Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel on the PETA Podcast. Before we get into the specifics of the indictments, tell me about how U.S. experimenters have this, it seems sometimes they have this insatiable desire for what appears to be an endless supply of monkeys. And why do we have that? Why do U.S. experimenters have that desire?
Why do they have that desire for more and more monkeys to the point where they've now driven 2 species to the brink of extinction? Money.
Yeah.
It's not science. It's not knowledge. It is about maintaining kind of the scientific or the infrastructure that they've built within their institutions, and whether it's the National Institutes of Health, military institutions, public or private universities, there has been this tradition of using non-human primates as this model for humans. And it's not even an irony anymore. The tragedy is that more than 1 million long-tailed macaques have been taken out of the forests of Asia and Africa, and they're dead. And everything that those experimenters promised us, the HIV vaccine, the malaria vaccine, the TB vaccine, the cure for this cancer, the treatment for that Alzheimer's, the menopause treatments, they consistently fail. And the only thing that has been consistent beyond that is the horrors and the tragedies that these animals have experienced.
Yeah, and I suppose also the COVID pandemic meant that there was a demand for U.S. research dollars.
It certainly did, and that's part of this big lie that has been sold. And again, it all comes back to money. There are about 200 different species of primates in the world. There are a handful that the experimentation industry has targeted for use in their labs. And in particular, there are two different species of macaque, these long-tailed ones, which are the ones that are part of this indictment, and then another type of macaque called the Indian origin rhesus macaque. The Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, all of the preclinical trials for those vaccines that were developed lickety-split at the beginning of the pandemic were tested in Indian origin rhesus macaques that had been born and bred on U.S. soil. None of these longtails were used for that, but the industry used the fear, used this enormous amount of money that was suddenly available to basically say, hey, just give us more money, give us lots of monkeys, and we'll get you whatever you want.
But the rhesus macaques weren't used, you said, right?
A handful of rhesus macaques, about 130, well, I think 133 to be precise,
Wow.
were used in these preclinical studies that were required by the FDA to put the vaccines in, the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, the J&J. They had to go into a large animal model before going into humans. But the industry knew early on that those rhesus macaques weren't behaving like humans when they got infected with SARS-CoV-2, but they checked the box. But these long-tailed macaques that are part of this indictment, they had no part in that. They're almost like bycatch in the most horrific way possible.
So what you're saying is that while they could get the monkeys, they got them. They weren't used in the vaccine experiments, but they just wanted the monkeys for other experiments. What kind of other experiments?
Exactly. So for about the last 25 years, the long-tailed macaque has been the monkey of choice for pharma, for toxicology, for lethal dose testing. And it's not because there's something special about the immunology or the physiology of these long-tailed macaques. It is simply because, and they admit this in their own publications, these macaques are smaller, which means it takes less drug. You have to use less experimental drug in them. They've been cheaper up until now because they were just grabbing them from Asia and bringing them over. And they thought no one was paying attention to them. That has all changed.
There's a bit of opportunism on the part of the experimenters. They went in and most of the monkeys that were used, you were talking about, were born and bred for experimentation here in the United States. But the macaques, the long-tailed macaques, they were taken from the wild. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The long-tailed macaques they're not really bred here in the U.S. for any significant numbers. And that's because, again, the industry has always said, hey, it's cheaper for us. No one's looking over our shoulder. Let's just go to Cambodia or Vietnam or Indonesia or Thailand or the Philippines or Mauritius and set up shop over there. We can grab monkeys from anywhere, put them through, get a piece of paper that says that these are good, healthy, clean, legally sourced monkeys and stick them on a plane. That's been their modus operandi.
And so this has been the industry, and this brings us to the indictments. So talk about the indictments, explain them. The Department of Justice indicted 8 individuals, charged them with smuggling monkeys from Cambodia to U.S. labs. And this is the situation when you talk about people grabbing monkeys. This is part of that monkey grab.
I want to make sure people understand, this term smuggling has been kind of out there. It's not like these monkeys were kind of stuffed into a false bottom of a crate. this smuggling involved something much more insidious, and it allowed for this really large scale. What the people who were involved allegedly did was to capture monkeys from the wild. And that process is horrific and vicious and deadly and dangerous. So they would do that on Sunday, go out, cut down a sleeping tree, round up these wild monkeys, take them to the first monkey farm, place them in there, get a piece of paper that says, oh, okay, monkey is in monkey farm A. Maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday, those monkeys get trucked to monkey farm B. They get another piece of paper. By Friday, there was a paper trail that basically says this monkey who was caught wild on Sunday, no, this monkey was born in these facilities. It's a captive bred monkey. Here's the paperwork. Look, it all looks good. This animal is ready for export to the U.S.
So are you saying they lied about the monkeys?
I don't have to say it. Actually, some of these officials and some of these individuals who have been indicted are actually on videotape. They've been caught on videotape engaging in these activities.
Well, so the 8 individuals who were charged by the Department of Justice, who were they precisely?
So 2 of them were ministers in the Cambodian Ministry of Forestry. So we're talking very high-ranking individuals. The other 6 were employees of one of the monkey farms there called Vanny. That's when the name of that farm. This was part of a 5-year investigation that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services has been engaged in. So we've talked about it before. This is an incredibly insular and secretive industry when you're dealing with monkeys. So it is to the Fish and Wildlife's credit. They put in the time. They developed the relationships. They found the people on the ground who were seeing just the horrors. They were seeing wild monkeys being brought in and kind of relabeled. And there were several layers of document doctoring that went on. The one that got them busted was that they falsely labeled on the CITES export permits.
And when we say CITES, what does CITES mean again?
So CITES is the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species.
All right, so it's an acronym, and
it's an acronym.
And CITES,
and basically, CITES is a global authority whose job is to basically focus on animals or plants that the trade in them, if the trade is unregulated, it would threaten the survival of those animals and plants. And so it's a complex organization, but there are 3 levels of trade that are allowed. These long-tailed macaques, the expectation would be that the animals are captive bred when they are exported for use in biomedical research.
Captive bred and not wild caught.
Captive bred and not wild caught. And if they are wild caught, you have to note that on your CITES export permit.
And from the documents that PETA has obtained, was that done?
We don't have access to the CITES export permits. Boy, do we wish we had access to those. We used to. Fish and Wildlife used to be much more forthcoming about giving public access to those documents. But no, but fortunately, the people involved in the investigation, the Fish and Wildlife agents, Department of Justice, State Department, whoever else was involved, they had access to those documents.
So when a monkey is said to be bred in captivity, but in fact is wild caught, but they say it was bred in captivity, is that the laundering method?
Exactly. So they have falsely labeled that animal on the CITES export permit. And the irony is this all comes down to paperwork.
Yeah.
That is what caught these folks up. The horrors that happened to these animals was all kind of reduced to how they were labeled on these pieces of paper.
And you're talking about the 2 Cambodian officials in the Cambodian government plus 6 members of the farm group that Vanny was the name of it, that that dealt with the export of these monkeys. Lisa, why is it bad to sell wild caught? Why is wild caught protected?
It's bad to sell any monkey, and it's wasteful and it's misleading and scientifically inappropriate to use any monkey in biomedical research. But wild monkeys, for several reasons. One, wild monkeys are part of the natural ecosystem. They're part of the biodiversity in these countries. They play critical roles. These long-tailed macaques are seed dispersers. They predate other animals. They are prey for other animals. They play an important role in the cultural traditions of these countries. And even more important in some ways is they actually act as buffers to protect humans from mosquitoes and other insects that feed on the monkeys, and they can transmit things like malaria or Japanese encephalitis rather than feeding on humans. So the monkey, the long-tailed macaque, any primate in its natural ecosystem is an integral part of that. There's balance there. Those animals, they're healthy, their immune systems are strong, they've got strong social groups. The minute you pull that animal from there, you rip that animal from there, you start off this cascade of events. The animals are often injured during the capture. They can be shot, the bones are broken, they're beaten, they're bloodied, they're stuffed in small sacks. They're then, as they're and this is all, this is not like happening in the bright of sunlight. This is happening like smuggling happens. They're stuffed into sacks, the sacks are closed or thrown in the back of trucks, a bunch of stuff is tossed on top of them. At every point along this trade, the animals are exposed to people. They're exposed to other animals. And so any type of infections that those humans or other animals have, these monkeys who are already broken are susceptible to.
How many of these monkeys came in during this time that resulted in the indictment of the Cambodian officials and the members of this private enterprise dealing with the United States?
I think one of the first thing to think about is that this indictment, this really is like the snowflake on the tip of the iceberg of what we can expect to see. Okay, this is Fish and Wildlife, DOJ, I think are just getting warmed up with these shows. So there were only a handful of shipments that were actually identified in the documents that were released. The shipments from 2018 up until 2022, early 2022. Again, the importance of this paperwork and the importance of a very specific law that we have in the US, which is called the Lacey Act. And the Lacey Act is the strongest law on the books, really, to protect wildlife trafficking. And the Lacey Act has a part of it that's related to false labeling. And this is a large part of what I believe the DOJ's indictment is focusing on. So when those CITES permits listed monkey A as captive, when in fact that animal was wild caught, and that permit has space, for about 50 animals to be listed on it. If even a single animal on that CITES permit is falsely labeled, then that permit is invalid. So that means that every single monkey listed on that shipment, and keep in mind, we're seeing shipments of 360 to 720 monkeys on average come in on these airplanes. These importers are bringing in at a time. So in theory, we're talking about tens of thousands of macaques.
All being laundered actually there's some that are laundered, but as you said, if there's one that was brought in illegally or misdocumented, then the whole shipment's bad.
Exactly. The whole shipment is contraband at that point.
And so what happens, or what is going on now with the monkeys that have come within the last 4 years? How is this affecting the monkey importation business to the U.S. now?
So one of the things that we learned in the indictment from the DOJ was that, correct, they indicted the 8 Cambodian nationals, but they also say clearly that there were 2 unindicted co-conspirators. And they, in the documents from the DOJ, Department of Justice, they list the city and state where these co-conspirators operate from. And one of them was in Alice, Texas. The other one was in Miami, Florida. And so PETA, right off the bat, we were the first to come out and to identify who we feel very strongly are the co-conspirators named in this indictment. One being Initiv. And Initiv, unfortunately, our listeners know a lot about Initiv and their practice with beagles. They don't stop at just abusing beagles. They are one of the largest importers of long-tailed macaques in the world. And the other unindicted co-conspirator is almost certainly Worldwide Primates. And Worldwide Primates, that name may not be as familiar, but the owner, the director, the CEO of Worldwide Primates is a man named Matthew Block. And Matthew Block is actually a felon. He was convicted of a felon back in the early 90s for trafficking infant orangutans. A decade or so after that, he sent some white powder to himself and claimed that animal rights activists had sent him anthrax. He got busted for that too. So these co-conspirators have long histories of showing contempt for law, contempt for animal welfare, contempt for just about everything except the mighty dollar.
Well, tell me what's happening now since the indictments and the unindicted co-conspirators have been semi-identified by their location. How has this impacted monkey imports to the U.S. at this point?
So this is where PETA has really been putting on we've been working nonstop since we first got the notice that these indictments have come down, because we know that there are tens of thousands of long-tailed macaques in this country who fall under the umbrella of this indictment. They're animals that were imported into the U.S. between 2018 and 2022. And we have been very vocal about both going to the end users. So this is the other thing. These monkeys come in, Inotiv and Worldwide Primates bring them in. They then turn around and sell them. And they're selling them to the National Institutes of Health, to universities, to military facilities, to the National Primate Research Centers. And what we're really focusing on is, one, identifying who may have gotten those monkeys, going to the end users and saying, excuse me, you have been receiving, we have documents, certificates of veterinary inspection, which show that, on this date, you received this number of macaques. This was the age, this was the sex. It's on you now to determine whether or not, sitting in your laboratory, you have contraband. You have monkeys who were illegally brought into this country. And if you do, well, you know what? You can't use those animals in your experiments. It's illegal to use them.
Now, Lisa, do you think that the labs and the companies had a role in this? Do you think they knew what was going on? What is the suspicion?
The suspicion is it's don't ask, don't tell. Just give me a monkey with a tail, a long tail, preferably. There have been enough reports coming out over the last, particularly during the pandemic, to say there were not enough monkeys in the captive monkey farms in Asia they couldn't breed fast enough to generate all the animals that were being shipped out. But as so often, the end user, the experimenter, has one thing in their mind. They're like, I got cash, give me a monkey. That's what matters. I got this grant that's waiting. I got some postdocs I need to do. I got, this experiment that I want to do. I just want a monkey, give it to me now.
So they're hooked on, well, it gets their business going, but how ethical is this practice?
This practice is as unethical as it can possibly be. Back in July, when the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, elevated long-tailed macaques to an endangered species status, there was dead silence from the monkey experimenters in this country. Not a word. No one said a peep, because think about it. What can you say? If all these promises that you've made to deliver vaccines, to deliver treatments, you've not only not delivered on that promise, but your actions, your greed, your demand for these monkeys, no matter what the cost to the animals, to the environment, to these countries, was so profound that you have driven a species of mammal to the edge of extinction through your greed. Yeah, you can't open your mouth, because nothing good can come out of that.
Do you think that the labs and the companies that have been part of this should be held responsible, should be culpable in some way?
Absolutely. I think everyone in this industry owes, they have a debt, and the debt is to these animals that remain. The debt is to the animals that they've already removed from the wild and dropped here in the US. Those monkeys can never go back to Cambodia or Vietnam or wherever else that they've been brought from, because you can't, it's too late. They've already been part of the system. They've already been, they don't know how to behave like a monkey. You can't take them back and drop them in those countries. So the importers, the initiatives, the worldwide primates, the Charles Rivers, everyone who's involved in that is responsible for preparing these animals for sanctuary here in the US. That is what their job is.
What's interesting is that during this 4-year period, I think some of the stories I saw in publications like the New York Times would suggest that there was a crisis in science, but not that the scientists were doing horrible things to the monkeys, but that there was a monkey shortage.
Right.
Do you think that was there to sort of help juice up the supply, saying that, hey, there's a demand here, we have a shortage, we need more monkeys, come on, get us more monkeys? I mean, what do you think the whole idea of spreading the narrative that there was a monkey shortage in the U.S. among experiments?
I think, again, that was all part of the plan. This industry has traditionally relied on going into these habitat countries because the regulations are looser, it's cheaper. Again, they thought no one was looking, no one was paying attention, and they would just grab every monkey that they could find. I think it's fascinating. So Innovative actually released a statement yesterday. It was a long statement, saying, oh gosh, we can't get any more monkeys and we might be in trouble. One of the things they included in their statement was, this industry is now going to have to focus more on domestic breeding of primates if we want to use them. And I thought, well, that's convenient for you to kind of toss that one out there now. And it is hypocritical. And it's also not going to work, because one of the industry has always relied on overseas sources. Again, because it's cheaper, but also because the industry has never been successful at really breeding large numbers of monkeys here in this country. And they're not successful because you cannot take a primate and put it in a little corral or a little cage by themselves and expect that animal is going to develop socially and physically in a way that allows them to successfully breed and produce the number of offspring that this industry consumes. It's never going to work. So we're at the full stop. This is like, we're done now. We're completely, utterly done. Monkeys don't work. It's not the way forward. Stop. How many more signs does this industry need? They're caught up in wildlife trafficking. They're violating the Animal Welfare Act right and left. They've got shippers and truckers who are not getting their license to move animals. They're bringing in animals that are just riddled with disease. And in the end, they're not delivering what they promised the taxpayer.
And also, there are certainly alternatives to using live monkeys.
So much so. It's the only positive thing that seems to have come out of this pandemic was that this other industry, this industry that focuses on human relevant biology, human tissues, human immunology, that industry of alternatives has just blown up. We're seeing multiple organs on chips that are linked. The 3D printed human tissues, the artificial intelligence, the epidemiological studies, all of that, the stem cell work, it's amazing. And that's where we need to be. We've got to get out of these forests. Going in and grabbing a monkey by a tail and ripping it out of a tree, stuffing it in a box and then dropping it in a cage in the US, it's wrong. It's stupid. It's bad science. It's unethical. It's immoral.
Now, is there anything that you can say positive about the importation and the use of monkeys in the labs? I mean, is there anything positive besides hurting and killing monkeys? For example, do Americans get anything out of this at all?
No, we get nothing out of this at all. And the scientific community has known that for decades. So I'm trying. There is nothing of any value that comes from taking a monkey from a forest in Asia and sticking it in a cage in Washington, D.C., or in Texas, or in Florida, or Louisiana, or wherever. Nothing. If it's, you have just made more problems, because you're right. Now we got 30, 40,000 monkeys sitting in these facilities right now. And this industry, we will hold their feet to the fire so that they pay for the lifetime care of these animals. That is, I will go down swinging on this one, because they brought those animals here. Those animals can never go home. And there's only one place for those animals. They belong in reputable sanctuaries where they can live out their 20 or 30 year lifespan. It's not like the forest of Asia. It's not their homes, but we owe them that. This industry owes them a way to live out their lives in dignity.
And what happens to those who were indicted? I suppose they will go to trial. I understand the penalties are fairly stiff. There's jail time, and there's tens of thousands of dollars in fines for the 8 people, and possibly for the companies. What's in the offing there if they're found guilty?
If they are found guilty, we're not talking years, we're talking decades of jail time for the individuals if they're found guilty. And we're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Because the other thing that the Lacey Act allows is to the penalties that can be applied to these companies who illegally import these animals is staggering, frankly. If each animal is worth $30,000, the penalty for importing that animal can be twice the value of that monkey. So, if I'm not great at math, but, even just say, eventually we identify 30,000 monkeys involved in this. And each of those monkeys is, worth twice, its penalty is worth twice the value of the monkey. That's 60,000. There's a whole lot of zeros behind that one.
That's a lot. 60,000 a monkey and 30,000 monkeys.
Yeah.
That's a lot. 60,000 monkeys times 30,000 monkeys. Oh, it broke my calculator.
Right? Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
It's gonna break this industry. And that's a good thing, because that's what this industry understands. This investigation, this indictment will hit them where it hurts the most. We're going after their money. And you know what? We're already seeing that. Innovative stock has already fallen 75%. In their statement, they acknowledge that 25% of their revenue comes from the importation of Cambodian monkeys. The doors are being shut on this. And when the doors are shut and the money stops flowing, that is what will shut this down. And so again, it hurts me that these folks cannot look at these animals and see how much they are like us, see the pain that they're feeling, see the horrors that we're causing them. But no, what they will see is the money draining from their bank accounts.
And so this is Initiative. They've come out and made this statement. There was some talk that maybe the Cambodian government had stopped importation. I don't know if it's clear whether or not they have, but if the United States dries up, could Cambodia find other buyers for their monkeys?
You're actually touching on my nightmares here, because what we know right now is that an Initiative statement yesterday, they said that Cambodia has kind of shut the door on exports, that Initiative is not able to get any monkeys out of Cambodia. I've spent the day trying to kind of piece together who exactly can tell us whether or not, since this indictment, any Cambodian monkey has arrived in this country. And that is an answerable question, because the CDC requires the importers to tell them at least 7 days in advance if they're bringing monkeys in, and they have to tell them where the monkeys are from and who's importing them. Fish and Wildlife requires that. So these questions are answerable. But to your point, Cambodia's Minister of Agriculture has said in a statement today, Cambodia is still exporting internationally. He didn't say to the US, he said internationally. So my fear is that these Cambodian monkeys that are sitting in these monkey farms that these American importers have set up, these kind of these shell facilities, those monkeys are being, boxed up and trucked across the country lines into Vietnam or into Laos or into Thailand. They may be going into China. And it's also, there's been some whisper of the potential for monkeys who are already here in the US to be re-exported to other countries where these facilities. So for example, we already know that Charles River Laboratories has facilities in Canada. And we know that when Charles River brings monkeys in from Vietnam, they stop in the US, they offload half the shipment. They then put the other monkeys on another airline and they fly them up to Canada. If one of the things that PETA is focusing on right now is making sure that Fish and Wildlife does everything in their power to make sure that every monkey who could possibly be implicated in this investigation, the monkeys who were brought over in the last 4 or 5 years, and the monkeys who were born here, that none of those animals are re-exported to another facility.
And that they stay here and live out their lives here in the U.S. in sanctuaries.
Exactly. That the U.S. industry, which made this mess, who took everything from these animals, is now held accountable, and that these monkeys get to spend what remains of their lives living in social groups, in sanctuaries, where they can have some modicum of a decent life.
Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel is a top primate scientist who once worked for the Washington National Primate Research Center. She's now a PETA scientist and a noted monkey expert, and she'll be following up on this case to see how it impacts all the top labs from the very top, the National Institutes of Health, to universities and other labs in the country who are dependent on monkeys for their research. For more, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org. PETA.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.